Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this week's video we're doing something a little bit different because following the release of my new book, Mastering Snowflake Solutions, a couple of people have reached out to me and asked about the process of writing a book, what it involved, and the costs and the process and how I found the entire experience. So this video is going to be all about how to write a technical book, in my experience, starting with the offer. So first of all, how did I find out about the opportunity to write a book, and if I'd ever thought about writing one before, the contract and timelines that you agree to with the publisher and how that works, the process that I followed to write the book, the review process, so what's involved when the publisher receives your first drafts, what do they do, and then finally the costs. So firstly, the offer. Well, I was contacted by the publisher A-Press just on a message on LinkedIn, and they asked if I'd be interested in writing a book around Snowflake. I said, yeah, whatever. I get asked things on LinkedIn all of the time in terms of work, which never really leads to anything. So I didn't really think this would be any different. I was surprised that somebody had asked me to write a book just on LinkedIn without potentially seeing any previous kind of content. But perhaps the publisher had came across something previously. I don't know to this day. I was like, yeah, whatever, we'll see what happens. I didn't think anything would come of that really. And then a couple of weeks later, we had a couple of conversations on the phone. The publisher's based in the US, so the time difference meant here in Australia, I was taking calls, first thing in the morning. We had a chat about the process, what would be involved, and I agreed in principle to do that. So at the time, we're looking at the book was going to be roughly 250 pages long. I had to initially put a vision down on paper in terms of what that book would look like. So who it was aimed at, the target audience, what readers would learn from the book. And A-Press were pretty good because they give you an example document to follow for the structure. Their document was based upon I think it was building bicycles. So they give you a structure of the document. You had to then go and complete that, following the structure for your own book, the vision of that. What kind of chapters would form part of the book, how many pages roughly were in each one, which was really hard to get my head around in terms of estimating the number of pages involved in each chapter when it's nothing more than just an idea at that stage. But I did a bit of research. I had an idea in my mind what kind of topics I want to cover, and a natural flow of those came to me quite easily. So I was quite fortunate in that respect. So I built that out over the course of 1.5 weeks, sent that back to the publisher. They made a couple of minor tweaks and revisions, but they were quite happy and quite liked the structure of the vision for the book. So they put that forward to their managers, and I didn't hear anything for quite a few weeks. And I thought, oh, well, that's it. I can take it or leave it either way. I'd never written a book previously. I probably would say I had aspirations to write a book at some stage about something in the future, but I just, it wasn't an opportunity I was actively seeking at the time. But then about a month later, there was some internal miscommunication on their side. I should have really found out a bit earlier that the book had been approved for me to write that. And then I was given a contract, and at that stage, you just don't have any real negotiation and leverage in terms of if you're writing your first book. It's quite difficult to sort of come to the negotiating table and say, I want X royalties or X percentage of royalties. So I just took what was given to me, and I thought I'll just try and enjoy the experience. We'll come back to the actual royalties and costs at the end of the video, so stay tuned to the end for when I go through the costs. So that was the offer. I then got the contract through, pretty short standard contract, I think, from what I can gather from reading online. And then the timelines. So I was approached in around April 2021 to write this book. At the time, the publisher was putting forward some what I felt were quite aggressive timelines. I think they were looking for a chapter every 2 weeks. Now, at the time, I had 2 young children, a day job as well. I had no previous experience in terms of how long it would take to actually write the material, and I didn't want to put myself under any undue pressure unnecessarily. So my timelines were far more tolerant. I had confidence in myself that I could write a book within, I think it worked out a roughly 6-month period in terms of submitting a first draft, getting it reviewed and getting through all the sign-off processes, which we'll come to in the next stage in more detail. But I didn't want that pressure of timelines that I'd signed up to hanging over me, because I knew that I would be really fixed on those timelines and trying to hit them. So I went for more lenient timelines, which took me until January 2022. I knew myself, like I say, I could deliver this faster, but I wanted to be comfortable and have some wiggle room in there, because I knew I needed some certain life events would come up during that stage, like moving house. I just didn't expect to be in lockdown for a long period of that time. At that point here in Australia, we got away fairly easily to the lockdowns around the COVID situation by that point. But during writing the book, which I'll get to in the process, we had a good period of 6 months worth of lockdowns, I think, here from across the winter in Sydney. So my timelines were fairly lenient, and then that kind of brings me to the process itself. So I kind of mapped out high level how long it would take based upon the book vision and the estimated number of pages for each chapter. What I had to do was produce an introduction, 10 end chapters to take me to roughly 250 pages, and submit those first drafts, if you like, and I would drip feed those to the publisher. The idea was to get early feedback. You had a style guide that you had to follow that the publisher gave you. So you imported the styles into Microsoft Word, or you just used their template, which had the styles up in them. So you had to follow a certain pattern in terms of headings, subheadings, labeling your tables and images correctly, following a certain approach as well. So there was a certain style guide that you had to follow, and it took a little bit of getting used to at first. So I was keen to kind of get my first chapter submitted. Everything was transferred using Google Drive these days. It makes it a lot easier to collaborate. So they sent me up a folder on there. I put my first drafts in there, and then I hopefully, I was going to get feedback quite early on. That didn't necessarily transpire. But looking at my timeline, I really wanted to try and enjoy the process, because I knew the way I kind of work is that if I've got a timeline or a deadline to do things, I'll be really focused and transfixed on the outcome. And I didn't want the book to become a drag and feel as though it was a noose around my neck and a chore to do. I really wanted to try to enjoy the process and enjoy the experience. So as part of that, I set myself a time box, 1 hour window every day, Monday to Friday, to write the book. I would sit down, I would write, if I was starting for chapter 1, I'd write down everything I knew about the topic off the top of my head. Once the hour was up, regardless of where I get to, I'd just finish the sentence and then go out and have a coffee as a reward or something. And the next day, same process again until I got to the end of the chapter. I'd written down everything I knew in my head. If I wasn't sure about certain bits, I'd highlight those and come back later. Once I got to the end of the chapter, then I went back through, filling the gaps of anything I missed, doing my own research, clarifying any points I wasn't 100% sure on, making sure they were fine. Then you eventually get to the end of the chapter and you've got a first draft of just written content. Then I needed to go and produce my own diagrams. So I had to draw my own diagrams out, produce those, export them, label them, put them into the Word document and number those accordingly, following the style guide. And then if there was a demo as part of that, I had to go into Snowflake myself, write the code, test the code and make sure everything worked. Also document the code a bit as well, because that's what will ship with the book at the end. So the diagrams and the code took a lot longer than just getting my head down and writing content. But I was still able to do roughly, just following that approach, a chapter every 2 weeks. So if I did 10 hours, that's my 1 hour a day, Monday to Friday for 2 weeks. That would roughly get me to the point where I'd have a first draft ready. I then sent it off to my colleague in the UK, who actually was kind enough to review all the chapters just for grammar and punctuation, and also he was a technical guy, not into Snowflake, but he was able to kind of just call out some things if they didn't make sense or if they were confusing or misleading. So did all that, submitting my chapters to G Drive for the review process. And the review process is 2 parts. One is the publisher reviewing it for style and punctuation and grammar. So you could consider that feedback that you get initially is a little bit pedantic, but they have to make sure that once it gets to the final kind of package for the typesetters to go through, it's in a fair, reasonable enough state that they can use it. So as part of that, I got a lot of feedback on the first couple of the chapters. That took a while to come through. By I think the time I got the feedback on the introduction in chapter 1, I was already 4 chapters in. So my kind of reasoning of getting early chapters to them quickly to get that feedback and build it in so I wasn't making the same mistakes didn't necessarily come to fruition, but I just cracked on regardless anyway. So there's 1 or 2 mistakes I made initially from a style guide perspective throughout the first 4 chapters, and I had to go back and refine them all, but it wasn't nothing significant, so that was okay. During the time though, I guess, of putting together those initial chapters, I had a kind of moment of realization that, wow, all this knowledge in my head and all these diagrams and code I'm doing just sitting here in my own world, this would be really, really valuable for other people. Around the same time, I decided to start the YouTube channel. I thought, well, it's a great idea. I'm writing the content every day. I may as well start sharing it on the internet with other people so they can also benefit. And that also provided a platform then for when the book was released. I'd have a following there that people may want to, get involved and buy the book at a later stage. So produced the YouTube videos initially, and then later on then I developed that further into a digital program called Mastering Snowflake. You could almost consider that almost accompanies the book and goes into real depth and detail with live demos and more content, I guess, around what the book's based on. So it tells you really how to apply all the concepts that I give you in the book. So they were sort of 2 really good things that came out of the process of just writing the book, simply getting these ideas, looking at things on paper and understanding that there's real value in providing that content and bringing it to a different market and a wider market at that as well. So that was really good. So that was the first part of the process. So once you submitted the first draft, you had the publisher go through it, check it out for style and punctuation and grammar. And then you also had a technical reviewer. They would go through it, and their job was really beneficial, I felt, because they could call out anything from a technical perspective that either they weren't sure about. They may have questioned 1 or 2 things. They may have questioned the use of terminology I was using, whereas I kind of aligned to Snowflake's documentation. They may have said, well, out in the field, people kind of call it X, Y, Z. So I had a certain judgment call to make when I addressed those comments. You never had any real interaction with the technical reviewer. They would just add comments onto the Google document. You go through those once you have the document back and address them. Sometimes I'll make changes, additions, or if I was happy that what I'd written originally conveyed the right sense in my mind, then I was okay to kind of justify myself in those situations. So the important thing is not to take it personally. It's purely on the work itself and trying to elevate the work to the right level for the reader at the end of the day. That's the purpose of it. I wrote a book that I would want to read, essentially. I wasn't trying to write a book to please everybody and cover everything. It's not a book on programming in detail. Yes, you do need SQL experience, and yes, I do provide you coding examples, but I wanted to write a book that I would read with 20 years of experience in the field, where I'm kind of not looking to learn a new programming language. I'm looking to understand certain concepts and solutions in the real world. And often my frustration with a lot of books is they're too rooted in theory and not practical in the sense of I want something I can read today and apply those skills tomorrow in the real world against real world challenges. And my hope is, and the aim for the book was to do exactly that. The final stage of the book actually went quite quickly for me. What happens is you get sent the proofs of the book. And so the proofs of the book are basically the typesetted versions that will actually go to print. It didn't take long at all once I had the final sign off to put this together. I think they were able to do this reasonably quickly once it had its slot in the queue, if you like, with those the publishers. It comes back in electronic format. You get to see it for the first time, it kind of looks like an e-reader, a Kindle version. You run through that. There's sometimes questions on certain chapters that you need to address all of those before you can submit each chapter back for the final proofs. And some of those are really quite, at that stage, very specific. They may have just found certain things where in the text I referred to a diagram incorrectly, possibly, and so they were asking for clarification around those things. So again, as you go through each stage in the process, you kind of cover off all your queries that you have yourself early on, give it to the publisher, you get a few more queries, get to the next stage with the final proofs, and there's very, very few queries there, you know, like 2-3% relative to everything else. Towards the end of the book, it started getting quite hard to put that time and commitment in to get it over the line. So, you know, you get to the point where towards the latter stages, you just kind of want to be done because you're so close, but yet so far. And what I felt is that I really needed a goal for the book that was bigger than just myself. I didn't want it to be just about me and self-fulfilling. So I had it on my mind for a while to give all royalties I receive from the sales of the book to charity. And I decided at that point then I'd give it all to the Black Dog Institute. It was a goal that was bigger than me, it would serve more people. That gave me the extra motivation I needed to do a really good job towards the end, because it wasn't just about me and myself and getting the book over the line. So this is what everybody wants to know about, are the costs that you get, or the revenue that you can expect from publishing a book. And a lot of people say if you Google online, you're not going to get rich from selling a book. Certainly in my case, it all goes to charity anyway. I think 60 days after the publishing date, you get a one-off payment of $750. This is US. And 10% of the royalties of the net profit A-Press make up the first 2,000 copies of the book I receive. Then I get 12% from 2001 to 3,000, and then finally 15% for over 3,000 copies of the book. I think for a technical book, it's hard to get a sense of numbers of copies sold, because you've got ebook versions, you've got hard copies split across different publishers as well. Even if you go on Amazon now, you'll just get a rank. You can use a calculator online to give you a view of what that means in terms of copies of books sold based upon the Amazon rank, but I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is. So obviously you'll sell a bulk of books quite early on, and then that'll start to tail off over time. So there you have it. That is the process in its entirety of what it takes to publish a book. The process I followed, it might not work for everybody, but it certainly was the approach that worked for me. Some of the other questions people have asked, how did I find the process itself? Well, other than the time it took to get the feedback on the early chapters to make sure it was on the right track, because I had no real idea of the level of writing that was required or the level of detail I needed to go into. But in the end, I actually found it fairly seamless, and I just focused on what I could do, passed everything over to the publisher, kept that communication dialogue ongoing, and just waited for the feedback to come as and when. And when that came through, then I was able to address it. And would I do it again? So I think if the subject was right, and it also depends on my time commitments, because I've got a lot of other stuff going on at the same time, potentially. That might not be the best time to write it. It's good to have some consistency in your writing. I pretty much only had a 2-week break in the whole writing period I had, and I had to move house as well, and I had homeschooling because of lockdown. So a number of different challenges as well that I didn't anticipate when I took on the challenge of writing this book. And then how do I feel now it's been launched itself? So I mean, it's great to see your name as a publisher, or your name on the front of a book, and on Amazon as well. So you know, it's you can take a level of satisfaction from that, even though it was, you know, I finished the whole book writing process before Christmas, and now it's March and it's just being released. But you know, I take a bit of pride in terms of what it is. I'm interested to see how it's received, and also we can give hopefully a lot of money back to charity as well. So hope you found it useful. I've covered everything I can in the session. If you've got other questions, then please feel free to drop them below. Let me know, and maybe I'll do a follow-up or answer your questions in the comments below. Thanks very much, and don't forget to like and subscribe because new videos coming soon.